myself to you. My name is Professor Volker Janssen. I am Vice Chair in the Department of History, and I work a lot with graduate students and also with the project upgrads here. And the reason I talk a lot about careers is that, especially in the Department of History, it can be a bit challenging and difficult to think of ways to apply your degrees in ways other than teaching. Teaching always seems to be an obvious decision. But after that, I recall over the years students asking what they could possibly do with their degree. Our pat answer used to be, well, anything. And that was really absolutely useless. To tell people you can do anything with your degree means absolutely nothing. You need to give students an idea. I need to give you guys an idea of how you can possibly make that happen and turn that into a specific idea. So that's why I like to talk about careers. The other reason is that I personally came to my current job only in a roundabout way. I only went to college at age 25, and before that I worked in different countries around in Central America, in Europe, and in New York, and tried out different jobs, mostly because I was looking for interesting experiences. And ultimately, I think it turned out to be a very good path, but it was a very unconventional one. And that made me more interested in helping students kind of come up with their own individual path. Now, in case you missed the first path, like Marisol did, and I will share this PowerPoint with you later, I have a YouTube recording of the first session where I explore and explain a little bit further what it means to have a degree in the social sciences and the humanities. Marisol, you're in American Studies, and I'm sure when you ask your professors, what can I do with American Studies, their answers aren't as concrete and specific as, for example, they go to the answers that you receive when you work in kinesiology or in civil engineering, where people have a fairly specific idea of what they're going to do. Or let's say, like Isabel, who works in marriage and family therapy, you probably have a pretty good idea of what you are training for, because it's called marriage and family therapy, right? For American Studies, the answers are far more open. And the first session really talks about what the difference here is in degrees in humanities, especially in social sciences, compared to the far more specific and tailored programs such as the one that Isabel is in. So that's the first session, and you can watch that on YouTube if you like. And I'm not going to do that now. There are a couple of rules that you need to embrace when you do your career search. And again, if you want to find out why it's a good thing for you and Marisol that your career search is harder, the recap will be helpful, the previous video. First rule is there is no shame in searching. While it's lucky and good for a student like Isabel to know exactly where she's heading, marriage and family therapy, for someone like Marisol or for Amar in political science, to be sort of unsure about what their degree really means in the job world. It's not a rat race. While we on campus often talk about the importance of graduating in 4 years for your college degree or in 2 years for the MA, this is an urgency that we have because it's a campus of over 40,000 students, and we need to make sure that the population moves through. But that's not really something that you need to be concerned about. For you to be done quickly with your degree has a cost benefit, and that's good. But other than that, there's no particular reason why you need to be urgent with getting into the job market quickly. And second, it's not at all urgent for you, as a matter of principle, to find the one job right away. If you do know right away what you want to do, and you finish your MA at the age of, I don't know, 23 or 24 or 25, and you find that job right away, that's great. But if you don't, that's okay too, right? Even though there seems to be a culture around you that says You got to find your job quickly and you got to make money. Um, you only need to make money to the extent that you shouldn't be a burden on others. Let's say you may not want to be dependent on your parents anymore. That's a completely understandable goal. And that's fairly easily accomplished without having to find the one career. So to that extent, yes, you may want to finish your graduation and you may want to find a job. But to find the one career that makes you happy, you have time. You can try things out. The thing that I tell almost every student that comes to me is that you should think about anything you can do abroad. Anything you do abroad for any given amount of time is helpful to you, whether you are in marriage and family therapy. Sorry, Isabel, I would pick more examples, but because there's only 6 of you, I'm going to reference you all the time. Okay. Whether you do work abroad and find yourself as an assistant in England, or whether you try to teach in an environment where people barely know English. Any study abroad experience, not study work or study abroad experience, is valuable. It teaches you a lot about places you are unfamiliar with. You know, let's say you go to Cambodia and you volunteer in a village for 3 months. It teaches you something about Cambodia. It teaches you something about yourself. What are you capable of? How can you cope with unpredictable circumstances? And it also teaches you something about your home. What do we take for granted here that we live in that really, is very different elsewhere? So any chance you have to take any job abroad for a given amount of time is a good thing for your personal development and your building of experiences. So take your time. There's no shame in searching and not finding right away what you discovered. And to expand on this point a little further, from my own personal experience, I remember not wanting to go to college right after high school and wanting to do something different. I wanted to specifically learn English and speak it like a native person. I still have an accent, but by and large, I think I have come to the point where I can claim bilingualism, and I wanted to really speak English well. So I worked overseas in London for a year, and then they sent my company sent me to Central America, where I learned more, and then I ended up in New York. And when I would come home to Germany, where I am from, you may have guessed that, and visited fellow friends and students, they would boast about their jobs. They were 25 years old, and they had bought a BMW or Audi, whatever stereotype fits best here, on lease, and felt accomplished, and they like arrived at where they're supposed to be, and they gloated a little bit and felt that I had sort of failed in my after school life, which they enjoyed because I was fairly good in high school, so they were stunned at me just sort of meandering around the world. But I learned not to let that bother me, because ultimately whatever jobs they did, I didn't want to do. I knew that even though it would be nice to have more money, I didn't want to work at a software company. I didn't want to work at a bank. None of that had any appeal to me. And I knew that my friends, ultimately, they lived for their weekend. They hated their work or endured their work or only enjoyed their work because it paid them for what allowed them to do things afterwards. And I never wanted to be the person who celebrates Friday like it's a release from slavery. That's not the life I wanted. So that's why I kept searching for what I really wanted to do. So I'm jumping ahead here on my rules. Number 5, your career is yours alone. You do not need to compare or compete with others. It's really difficult sometimes to maintain that principle, that you do not need to look at what others are doing. Only do what you want to do. Now, if that takes some time to find, as I said, that's okay. For you here as a group with your fellow students, again, comparing is not what you got to do, but it is a good idea to talk with fellow students about what to do after you have graduated. For master students especially, the program can be very quick. Often it's 2 years. And you will have just started, and within 2 years you'll already be out, and then you have to make your next big decision. If I just ask you guys here, how long have you been in the program? Let's see, Daisy, how long have you been in the program?
Just my second semester now.
Okay, so your second semester. How long do you think it will be until you graduate?
I think I'll be done by next year.
All right, right. So you're only in your second semester, but you already need to start thinking ahead as to where you turn from here. Do you talk with other students about their career plans, or is this something that you're pondering on your own, more or less?
Feel like I have a very good idea of what I want to do.
Okay, well, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, geology has some very direct applications, and there's a good amount of work there. And let's hope those job opportunities will continue even if we make our transition away from fossil fuels, because of course gas and oil and coal industries are where most geologists ultimately find their work. But I'm sure there's other stuff out there as well. The rule for all of you is to talk to each other about job ideas and careers. To that extent, you're in the same boat. But, and this is where the metaphor breaks up, you all have to paddle in your own separate directions, right? So you're not quite in the same boat, I guess. You're just sort of, you're on the same water. That's maybe that's a better metaphor. And then the other thing that's important is that you're looking for jobs, and that's fine, but don't confuse jobs with careers. So Isabel may find a job in a marriage and family therapy practice for a few years, where she may be a liaison to particular families, and that may be a good building block. But ultimately, you may know that that's not the place where you want to stay. You want to build something for yourself, and that's fine. It is a building block to your career, not the career itself. If Marisol in American Studies decides to work for a small publishing firm where she edits all kinds of texts, let's say it's a higher ed publisher, and you have to work in a publishing office where you need to review text on American government or political science or geography, and a lot of the work is fairly mundane, but you learn the publishing industry. As a result, you find out a little bit about how publishing and higher education works. That's a building block to maybe the next job as an editor or assistant editor, and may get you to a point where you understand how and where to find other jobs that lead you further. So jobs are the building blocks to careers. I'm sure that all of you understand that you will not find the one job that you will stay in for the rest of your life. For my father's generation, who finished school, let's see, when did he finish school? That was a long time ago. He's been dead for a while. He was born in 1929, so he finished his school on an emergency degree in Postmark, Germany in 1947. The idea there was that you would find a company and you would be able to work for that company for the rest of your life. And if that didn't happen, that often tended to be a big disappointment for people. I was born in 1972, and we already learned to understand that you're probably going to have to switch jobs at some point. This is all the more true for you. You may be lucky to end up working for one company or one organization for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. There's a good chance that your work futures will look very different, that you work at one place for 5 or 6 years and then move on to something else. So you need to bear that in mind, that you're not looking for the one. You're looking for building blocks to a larger set. And that gets to another point that I make in more detail in my other presentation that you can see in the recap, is that all of you in humanities and social sciences are more likely than anyone else to learn for life. So abandon the notion that you are acquiring your degree, then go and do the job and apply the things you learned, and that's all you do. And basically from there on, you will just be working for the next 40 years or so. What you will do instead is you will have learned a lot in your degree. You will get a job and learn more. and then look for another job where you have to learn even more, and then find another job and learn more still. And that's how it should be. You are more likely to be happy and satisfied with your work if you're constantly learning new things. The idea that somehow it's preferable to have learned everything in the first step and after that just spend your life applying it. Most people find that unsatisfactory. And imagine a life where for 30 or 40 years, you do one job, you know how to do it, and you no longer have to learn anything else again. That's a horrible scenario, right? Isn't it dreadful that you no longer need to read anything because you know it all, and everything else it's just for your leisure. That's not a life you're looking for. This is why you are in humanities and social sciences, and this is why you're in college. All right, I think that's the rules that you should embrace, and that's about it for that. Now, you need to be aware of the resources that you have. And the first stop for you should always be your department. What are your department's career resources? Chances are that some of your professors have thought about this at some point and have posted some resources for your search. And you just need to find them. And while we as faculty tend to think it's completely obvious where to find stuff on our department website, turns out it's not. I myself have built a ton of material for career preparation in history. Let's see, is anyone from my history sign-ups there? Clay, Elizabeth? No? No? Okay. And I promise you, if I ask them, where do you find the career prep materials on the history department website, they would not know. Which in part, I guess, is on us because we don't make it easy enough. And part it's the rules of how the university allows us to set up our websites. If you have noticed that all the websites, all the pages on Fullerton, on the Fullerton website look kind of the same, it's because we are bound by rules. They always have to be, has to be the dark blue up front, up top, and it has to be the white. There's not much flexibility. So as a result, we are not as successful at publicizing what we have found for you as we would like to be. So ask professors if they know, ask the staff in your department if they know, or spend more time still searching on the department website. The other thing that you need to find is the professional organizations that your degree or program is associated with. Does anyone here know what is the main professional organization of your discipline? Not a rhetorical question. I actually want to know. No?
For me, it's the American Counseling Association, or the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. And I also am a psychology major, so follow the American Psychological Association as well.
All right. All those organizations are deeply concerned or interested in the career prospects of new members. So, Isabel, are you a member of any of these organizations?
Currently, I'm a member of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Have you ever looked for career resources on their sites?
I do, yes, and they also offer like workshops and different events and resources as well, newsletters with different resources for careers too. So
you already seem to be ahead of the game, and I get this every time I teach this workshop, that the people who come are the ones that are more mindful and are already a little better prepared. Marisol, I don't know whether there is an American Studies Association. I'm fairly sure there is. But since American Studies is an enhanced, or you might say better version of American history, the American Historical Association is very interested in making sure that people with a history degree have career paths ahead of them. So the AHA is an organization that probably caters to a lot of your interests. You may also want to ask your faculty, what are the professional organizations that they are members of, and then look into student memberships in these organizations. That's where I would go if I were you, and I would become an early member also to be able to network a little more effectively. Now, networking is often misunderstood as just sort of schmoozing around and making sure that people know your name. It's actually finding ways to work with people and learning from people. That's really how networking should go. And if you are a member of the organization, and let's say you know they have national events, and it's possible for you to go to these events, that's something that you should absolutely do. Even if you know that after graduation, maybe you're no longer, pursuing American studies academically, Marisol. Maybe this will be something an interest on the side. But how good would it be for you, let's say, if you were to work as a researcher for a company doing documentaries? There would be a lot of freelancing work for you. There's very little sort of steady, stable work. But if you were to build a reputation as a freelancer in documentary research, that would be a kind of work where eventually you would probably educate yourself a little bit on the skills of screenwriting and learn other additional skills that have to do with media. To remain a member of the American Studies Association, if that's the name of your organization, and constantly learn what people in American studies are doing, it would maintain sort of your freshness of mind about what ideas are out there. You will be constantly getting new ideas. For Isabel, that will be the same in marriage and family therapy, or for Daisy in geology. That's the way to stay current in your discipline, and that makes you more attractive in the job market as well. Now, the other thing that you need to be aware of, or that you need to sort of put on a bigger than a Post-it, if you have a whiteboard to write on, put on your whiteboard up above your head or your computer, your department's graduate program student learning outcomes. Because upon your graduation, you are supposed to be good at something specific to your discipline. And while you know that generally you're supposed to know stuff about geology, be kind of knowledgeable on, let's pick someone else here, Kate. What's your major? Public administration. You ought to know the rules of public administration, of how to operate a government body, a government office. You don't really have a full outline of what your specific skills are supposed to be. The department's graduate program student learning outcomes are the ones that identify this. And they will be helpful in helping you describe what your skills are. Have you ever tried to summarize to someone why your particular degree makes you so uniquely qualified? Again, for Isabel, to say that I am suitable for work in marriage and family therapy because I received a degree in marriage and family therapy. That's an easy pitch. For Kate in public administration, I would say that's also comparably easy to do. For Amr in political science, it gets a little broader because they might say, why don't I just go with Kate here, who has a degree in public administration? And if you say, Amr, in response, well, my degree is a little broader and has other elements, they might say, well, in that case, why don't I go to Marisol, who does American Studies? So for you to know specifically what you are good at, that makes you different from, say, Marisol in American Studies or Kate in public administration, that's important. And you will at one point come to the situation where people will ask you, well, I have a couple of applicants here. And again, I'm choosing you, Marisol. You have an MA in American Studies, but I have someone here who has a degree in political science and someone else here who has one in screenwriting. So when it comes to work in documentary writing, why should I pick you? You need to have an answer for that is specific to your degree. And you can't just say, I'm a good writer, or I think critically. Apparently everyone's thinking critically. There's not a department on campus that doesn't claim critical thinking skills. I mean, do we have someone here from kinesiology? I think that person didn't show up. Jeanette? No. I'm sure kinesiology will make the point that their students learn to think critically. So that's not sufficient, right? You have to be specific in that. And one of the things that I will ask you to do once we are done with this little introduction here is that you actually try to find your department's graduate program student learning outcomes. What are you supposed to know at the end, right? And then find out, where do you think is your strength? What is your real emphasis where you think, oh man, this is me. I actually do this well. And if anyone were to ask me what makes me as an American Studies graduate so uniquely qualified, that's the one. So that's something to think about. Again, this harks back on my first presentation from a month ago. Identify your primary research interests and specialty. What are you particularly good at? For Isabel, are your strengths and is your passion really, say, in couples counseling, or is it in assisting parents or aiding children with, say, ADHD challenges? Where does your heart lie? What are your real strengths here? What is it that you would want to do, and what is it that you do where sort of you forget time because you care so much about it? Because ideally you want to find work with, on something that you love to do, because you're bound to be better at something that you love than something that you just get trained in. Connect any personal interests that you have with that interest. For Isabel, I don't know how that would work in marriage and family therapy, unless you say maybe you come from a big family and you have learned in your experience with big families how important it is to negotiate between siblings, or maybe you had the misfortune of having to negotiate between your parents, which I don't wish on anyone, and I'm just hypothesizing here. That gives you a particular affinity or strength or compassion for that particular field. That would be the way to go. For Marisol in American Studies, maybe you had a particular personal interest in, say, Southern California girls skateboarding culture. Right. This is actually a real thing, emerged from the 1970s, and that would give you a leg up of sorts if it comes to, say, coaching, girls' sports in a high school outside of the work that you do as a teacher, for instance. Or it would allow you maybe to write as a freelancer on girls and sports, because this is something that you've always had an interest in. You also want to try to find and pinpoint any commercial activities, government activities, or non-governmental public service activities that are related to your personal interest. So the federal government, for instance, hires graduates from pretty much any discipline that we have on campus, whether it is nurses, kinesiologists, marriage and family therapists. You just imagine how many marriage and family therapists are required in the armed forces alone, right? Including American Studies. I was driving the other day and listened to an NPR story about Indian boarding schools from the early 20th century, where progressives believed it was better to educate Native Americans how to act like white people and farmers than to kill them. And granted, that was a better step, but it created enormous trauma and injustices for the children that were taken from their tribes and the parents and brought across the country to other boarding schools. The Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania was the feature of that story. And they have just recently come to realize that the burial grounds of these schools have all these children from their tribes out there in Carlisle. Well, really, there should be somewhere in Wisconsin. And now the Department of the Interior has an office, a staff that is committed to repatriating, you might say, to return the remains of these children to their tribes. Do you know who works that kind of work? It's people that, say, do American Studies or history. or anthropology or archaeology. I have a former student who wrote an MA paper on draft resistors in World War I, and now she works for the Department of Defense with an office that that finds and then repatriates mostly pilots from World War II that have crashed in the Pacific, on Pacific Islands, or even in Europe. Most of her work happens to be on Papua New Guinea, where there's still thousands of planes crashed somewhere with the remains of pilots waiting to be repatriated. That's the work that she does. So the federal government, this is the gist of it, hires pretty much every discipline. In geology, you could imagine that finding or managing the oil reserves of the nation includes the need for geological skills. So if you're looking for a place where your particular skill might come in handy, federal government is always a place. State government also often applies still. For public administration, obviously it's local government and then every level upward. But also non-governmental agencies. Non-governmental or non-profit agencies don't mean that they don't pay. It's not all volunteer work. So you can work for Planned Parenthood or the Natural Resources Defense Council. You can work for them and get paid in your particular expertise. So for example, as a geologist, if you don't necessarily want to work for Shell or British Petroleum, working for the Natural Resources Defense Council would be another option that takes you a different route. So look for the commercial or non-commercial places where your skills might be in demand. Apart from using your knowledge, using your skills, your methodology, the way you think about life and work and current events is important. A geologist will approach, say, the relationship of a federal government to a native tribe in the region of, say, a large oil field very differently than, say, what Marisol in American Studies, right? You have very different approaches to the same challenge. You need to be specific about what you are, how you understand the world and what asset you bring to that. So it's your method of thinking, because ultimately that's what you learn in college, how to think, right? You didn't come here to just get a big pile of knowledge dumped on you and walk around with that like it's some sort of huge baggage. That's not, you're not a vessel that we fill, right? It's the way you think that makes you different. And then using your communication skills. And again, this is actually specific to each and every department. Isabel will talk about family, children, and parents very differently. For example, Isabel might very well also work for the Department of Interior's effort to return the remains of children from the Carlisle burial ground to Wisconsin. But Isabel will talk about the challenges involved in that process very differently than, say, Marisol would in American Studies. Right? You have your own vocabulary, your own separate emphases, what you talk about, and you need to be aware of that as your particular skill. Get yourself a whole set of bookmarks for proper search engines for work. There are a couple here. Higher ed jobs, those are jobs in education. So if you are interested in pursuing careers that relate to teaching at the community college level, or if you are looking for, if you want to assess the prospects for working with a PhD at tenure track positions at colleges, or if you are interested in working in higher education in administrative capacity, let's say work for student services. The work in higher education goes way beyond teaching jobs. I'm sure you understand this. So that would be a place to go. USAjobs.gov, all the federal government jobs. And if you just plug in there, therapist, there will be jobs there. Geologist, there will be jobs there. Historian, there will be jobs there. So that's a good place to go. Digital Humanities, digitalhumanitiesnow.org, category new jobs. That's new jobs. That's the humanities specifically. For those of you who are in geology or other non-humanities fields, that may not be the place you need to go. You should also, at this point, have a LinkedIn account. I'm not an advocate of social media. I have never been on it, and I'm averse to it. And I can't even claim age as an excuse, but I don't like social media. But LinkedIn has some benefits because, as far as I can tell, to this point, it remains primarily a networking tool for professional connections. It has not fallen apart and become some sort of a hookup site. So LinkedIn is still the place where you can find job connections. It's also the place where you are likely to be able to research your department's alumni. So if you want to find out what have the geology graduates of the last years done within their work, or for Marisol, American Studies, what have previous American Studies graduates done and where have they found work? That would be the place to find them. Right? That might even be one of the first networking opportunities you want to take advantage of. That's something that I would put on my to-do list if I were you. Then, in addition, other research, you should take advantage of the Career Center resources. Hands up, who here has sort of perused Career Center resources? Okay, so Marisol, but that's apparently the only person who's done it. Oh, and wait, there's one more. Yes, Manjula, you have done that as well. Good.
I have to. Sorry.
Okay, so all right, so there's, but not everybody, you know, and given that graduate students tend to be the more informed and the more.
I did as well. I'm not sure if you saw
okay.
my hand.
All right, okay, I changed my setup here, so now I can see all of you. Okay, so my point is somewhat diluted, but still true. Not all of you have taken advantage of the Career Center services that involves a search engine for jobs and internships. It offers you some counseling on interviewing, with a recorded webinar, and then an interview practice tool. And then there's also a site that I recently learned about that actually tells you more specifically what you can do with your discipline and actually offers you a whole list of possible jobs that relate to your discipline. That's not the Career Center site, but it's one I included here anyway. So you should have all this on a to-do list of sorts, and approach your search systematically in that way. So what I want you to do now actually is do some of these things. And we are not big enough to divide you into groups, or are we? Let's see.